Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Christiana Best, host and creator of the podcast Inside Out, Outside In. This podcast was developed for and by colleges and universities. It is guided by the themes of diversity, inclusion, and equity. The goal of the podcast is to educate, inform, build community, and inspire change while centering the voices and experiences of people of color. The contents of this podcast do not represent any college or university. Gentlemen, welcome to the podcast Inside Out, Outside In. My name is Christiana Best Giacomini, and I am really excited to be here with you. Before we get started, I am going to introduce you each. So I'm going to start with Abdul Ramad Mohammed, who's the executive director and founder of the multidimensional social service agency, My People's Clinical Services. Founded on March 2005, My People Clinical Services offers a wide array of both therapeutic and non-therapeutic support services and programs. The driving philosophy of My People's Clinical Service is derived from the agency's mission statement to enable my people to help your people so that our people will succeed. Excellent. On a daily basis, My People's Clinical Services staff commit to support, empower, and help to rebuild the individuals and families we serve. In 2018, My People Clinical Services added a nonprofit arm to the agency named My People Community Services to further their work in Greater Hartford community. Next is Steve Rada Ginsburg, who's the director of the Autorino Center for the Arts and Humanities at the University of St. Joseph, a mission-based world-class performing arts presenter that receives over 30,000 guests a year. In 2001, Stephen co-founded the award-winning original creation theater company Heartbeat Ensemble. Stephen was selected by the American Theater magazine as one of 25 theater artists most likely to influence theater in the next 25 years. He was also recognized as a 2018 State of Connecticut Performing Art Fellow and by the Hartford Business Journal on its 40 under 40 list. Stephen is an advisor for New England Foundation for the Arts National Theater Project and the Ann T. and Edward C. Roberts Foundation. Next is Dr. Anthony De Jesus. Dr. De Jesus is an associate professor in the Department of Social Work and Equitable Community Practice at the University of St. Joseph in West Hartford, Connecticut. He received his MSW at Boston University School of Social Work and an EDM and EDD at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. A former school social worker trained as an education researcher, he has advanced a multidisciplinary research agenda with a focus on issues of culture and identity and access to K-12 and higher education institutions and professions, and access to culturally responsive services in community-based mental health, child welfare, and youth services. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here with me today. As you know, our topic is engaging fathers, discussion around fatherhood, manhood, and all that goes with that. You are all fathers. You represent different racial and ethnic groups. Um, and I'm really excited and looking forward to talking to you about all that goes with being a father and being a man in America today. So to get started, I want to I'm going to throw out this question. Um, to what extent do you feel your fathers have influenced your idea of what it is to be a man and a father today? I would start with Mohammed. Then I'd go to Steve, then Dr. De Jesus.
Well, what I would say is my father is definitely kind of like framed the type of man that I want to be. I often tell people that I just basically copied my father in almost everything. You know, when I was gonna go to college, I decided to go to his alma mater. You know, when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do for work, he was a social worker, so I decided I would be a social worker, and so I really looked up to my father my entire life, and I really saw him as a person, like the type of person that I wanted to be, and so I think that he was a great role model for me, and I respected him highly and loved him dearly.
Great, thank you. Stephen?
Well, I think, I know that my father had me in his best interests at all times, cared about me, thought about me, um, but had a hard time relating to me. I think my father was somebody who carried the stress of caring for a family of four, running independent businesses, trying to make things work out as he developed and himself throughout time. So to carry all that forward, I recognized as a child how much one wants from their father. I was thinking how much I wanted from my father. And now as an adult, knowing that he was taken care of so much. But at the same time, it takes, a playfulness that I wish he had had. And I went into the theater because we were very, very different people. As external, he was internal. I liked sports, he liked books. So the way he tried to channel me into certain things throughout time created some sort of not conflicts, but just differences that we learn to live with. So, caring, loving, somebody I look up to, and somebody that we had to work out differences with.
Absolutely. Great, thank you. Dr. De Jesus.
So I think that this is a great question. It from my father, I think I get the ability to see the good in people and the interest in wanting to bring that out in people. I think that an emphasis on relationships and maintaining good relationships, friendships, family relationships, uh, is something that I get from my father. In that, I guess, in that regard, conversational skills, or as we might write in letters of recommendation, excellent interpersonal communication skills. Um, I think that from my father, I get also a just a sense of contentment with being with people and doing what I can to make a difference. And um, and so my father is not somebody who has a lot of education or was able to give me a lot in thinking about that journey beyond working hard and sacrificing and supporting me and helping pay tuition and have expectations that I would do my best. But I needed to rely on other people to kind of navigate um, higher ed and professional life. And but I think that there was a strong motivation to do well and to do good. And I get that from my father. Um, and I think I get from my father a strong interest in maintaining a clean kitchen sink and doing the dishes.
Wow, well, thank you for that. It's interesting that your recollection and experience with your father, in some ways, I hear some of the similarities in terms of supportive, certainly caretake, you know, provider, it sounds like, in terms of the household, and really appreciating their efforts to do the best they can as fathers, right? And also recognizing that, especially in Steve and Dr. De Jesus's um, case, recognizing that there were times when there were differences, and you had to find other people to provide you with the direction or the support you needed. Whereas with you, Abdul, it was that your father was sort of like he set a template for you, and you were able to follow it, and it worked out really well for you.
Mhm. I agree.
Um, yeah, yeah. So, um, what messages did you receive about masculinity from your father?
Starting with me again.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, I think that it's I come from a family of social workers, right?
right.
But at the same time, I think that like my father played football, you know, like deep into his like when he was like in his late 20s, he was like in the like community football team, and so I wouldn't say that I never would think of my father like he was like a tough guy, but I always thought him as a man of honor. I wouldn't mess with him. Like it was somebody I wouldn't mess with, but I'm just saying like he didn't have to carry like he was big, like he's like 6'3", maybe 240, 250, maybe more. And so, but I think that he always treated everybody with respect, and everyone treated him with respect. And a lot of times when we talk about masculinity, it's almost like the first image that just popped in my head was like muscles. And I don't think that his muscle was up here. Like his muscle was like he was using that brain a lot more than physical muscle. And I believe that it's a it's I love to talk about this because it's a in our society a lot of time we we um we talk about masculinity in its physical attributes, and kind of like it always has something to do with toughness. But I think that what he was showing me was that I always remember a time one day I went with him to one of his jobs, and we were walking across the campus, and everybody that he passed he spoke to, and everybody that and some of the people were of course speaking to him before he even said anything to. He didn't get a chance to speak yet, but it was like I could see how much they adored him, and I loved, like, it was like that day I was like in my mind I was thinking that's the kind of that like that's what I want people to like revere me, want to talk to me, want to be friends with me, I mean I really like that. So to me, his way of showing masculinity was one of like leadership, like being out front, and treating people with the same respect that he wanted to have for himself.
Yeah. It sounds like relationships were also very important to him, right?
Yeah, he knew how to, like, just he was just the type of person that when people have a problem they'll go to him, or they need someone to kind of speak on their behalf they'll go to him. And so I just really and to me, like, I like the idea of masculinity being somebody that is more of a protector, but they can do it with their words. Like, they're powerful because of what they can say, not necessarily what they can do to you. And I
Right.
thought that was one of the I think I was lucky in that sense, because I often tell people, like, when I would get in trouble, I would have preferred sometimes to get a whooping, right? Over hearing him say something like, "Yo, you really disappointed me." And
Right.
because it was like I wanted to be able to, I didn't want to disappoint him. And a whooping is fast, like, pop, 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 you're out of there. But words, you have to carry that. You have to kind
Yeah.
of think about it later, and it has an impact on you.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that story. So, Steve, can you tell me how you define masculinity and what messages you got from your father related to that?
It's a really good question. And I do think, the model for masculinity is from my father. And how do I think about that? And how do I remember that? There's a few memories that like really stick out in my mind. I remember my dad got pulled over by the police. It's the only time I ever remember him getting pulled over. Policeman was young, you know, definitely younger than he was. And to me, my dad's always looked old. Always, I don't know if that was true for other people, but when he was in his 40s and I was in my early years, he was probably 35 when I was born. And so I was 10 when he was 45, which I'm 45 now, but it's just probably about that time. He looked old to me, and this probably 27-year-old police officer came up. And my dad started like almost cussing him out, just like challenging him and just saying, he said, I know I wasn't speeding. I know I wasn't, like talking to him like that. And I was so surprised. And to me, it was like, that's an image that to me spoke about masculinity, because he didn't crumble under authority. He sort of spoke his, wherever that was coming from, whether it was he didn't have the money to pay a ticket, or he was worried about the insurance going up, or he was actually had a conviction he wasn't speeding. I don't know what it was, but to see him talking back like that. So that, my father was a Vietnam vet, and I know he was scarred. And the other memory that I have was, my parents had a little, they ran a food store, and in the back there was kind of a deli with some places to sit down. And him and a guy that I don't know if he was friends with, I don't even remember who the guy was, but was also a Vietnam vet. And they, over a beer, sat down, and it was like, I just really remember how heavy the atmosphere was. And it's the only time in my life I have ever seen my father talk about his time in Vietnam. And it was heavy, it was intense, it was him sharing stories with another guy who had been there as well. And that to me also jumps out as a moment of sort of like what I would take away as being a man. So stepping up to authority, somebody who's been through something that mainly men kind of go through, and a lot of those things he buried, and they were dark parts of himself. He didn't talk about the war. He also didn't vocalize that much and burst out against authority. And those two times really showed me something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, Tony.
So I think that my father was the first model that I had that invited me to think about masculinity differently than that which was kind of emphasized in my own family, mm-hmm. and in my own culture, and in the broader kind of US culture. In this sense, I think my father really gave me a gift, and that was to be a model that was not stereotypically masculine in needing to emphasize physical strength or particular types of skills. In fact, I remember at times struggling or feeling like, my father was never very handy. He's still not very handy. And, but I had all these uncles who were really handy, and they taught me how to change the oil. They taught me how to, use different kinds of tools. And I couldn't get that from my father. And at times I struggled with that. But those other uncles who I loved dearly, they were different. And they were like many men in my community and that I've encountered in my life that emphasized notions of masculinity that were that along the lines of what we would talk about as toxic masculinity. And and my father didn't emphasize those things. He didn't embrace those things in the same ways. Now, of course, there were many machista values in my family that my father, I'm probably more aware of those things now with my father than I've ever been. Um, but I, um, I valued that he valued spending time with me. And, so some of that was like sports, but it wasn't about winning. He was a coach, a baseball coach for my brother, my younger brother's little league team. My little league team was a disaster, and so was our coach. But you know, about a year ago, we went down to Florida for the holidays, which is where my parents live, and we met up with my parents in outside of Atlanta, and we visited an old friend who who was on that baseball team with my brother, and he just he just talked so wonderfully about what a difference it made for my father to have been his coach during that time, right? So there was a nurturing dimension that I saw in my father that was not present in the same ways with other men in my family, as wonderful as they were, and as much as they loved me and I loved them. And I think that that has very much influenced who I am in ways that I've never really acknowledged. I'll probably be um, I'm more readily willing to acknowledge my mother's influence in my evolution as a social worker. Um, but but my father very much modeled that for me, and I think when Abdul talked about his father, um, really emphasizing his intellect and his mind and thinking, I think that my father really emphasized the heart and and giving of himself, and in ways that I think were often selfless, and so that definitely influenced me.
Great. Well, thank you for that. You started to talk more about men outside of your household who were part of the family, but I also want to just reach in towards your individual cultures, right? You're three men from different racial groups, and with that comes culture, cultural norms. How does your culture define masculinity, and has it had any influence on you? Um, similar to how we started to talk. So I'll start with Abdul again.
Yeah, I mean, I'm black, right? I'm African American. I'm Muslim, um, and I think that I think that when you start talking about culture, right, it almost steps outside. Well, it steps outside of just my house, right? And so I think that the influence of everything that's going on outside, like when it's one culture in my house, right? We go to the masjid every Sunday. When you go home, you have to act a certain way. And I think that as a young African American male matures, there is a phase, and I won't even say all of us, but for me in particular, I know that there was a phase where I was more influenced by the dominant culture, right? The dominant African American culture, as opposed to what I was learning at home. And I think that, you want to fit in, my name's Abdul Rahman. And so people, whatever, I have to kind of like make myself a certain level of confidence. I have to learn how to carry myself so that I don't, so that it's actually the opposite of what we were just talking about as it pertains to masculinity, right? So there's because in some ways you have to be more tough or more something so that you can kind of get through without having to have issues that, like I was actually talking to somebody yesterday. I was in a group yesterday and we were talking about how in boyhood, I had gotten in trouble one time because I let one of my little brothers get beat up. And then I got in trouble from my father. And my father had hit me, he had hit me very hard, right? But it was the idea, what happened, it was a great moment because when he hit me, I didn't like crumble. And it made me think like, if this guy just hit me and I didn't crumble, I'm not gonna let people pick on my little brothers at the park anymore. I'm gonna be a big brother. I'm gonna step up. I'm not gonna be scared. And I was saying like, when I was a little boy, I did feel like scared up until that day, like up until that point. And it was like because it was just like we were like suburb kids, right? So even I lived in White Plains, New York, but all of my friends, all the kids, other African American kids, maybe they lived in the projects, maybe they lived in a certain part of the community, and I lived in the white neighborhood. And so it was kind of like I was like in a way on my own, and I felt like I had to assimilate or become something other than what I was maybe being taught, because if I didn't, I don't know how you survive in a way. Like, I mean, I guess I could have survived, but it wouldn't have been fun. It wouldn't have been good for me. And so I think that what I learned after that day was that I have to defend myself. I have to defend my siblings, and I have to believe in myself. I think it was the beginning. Like, I mean, I know that there was like another Abdul, right? There was another version of myself where, like I said, I would walk down the street and I would contemplate how am I gonna get home and avoid the bullies? Like, how do I avoid the guys that might take my money or do whatever? I used to think about all of that stuff. And then after I decided that, well, I have to either deal with it or I'm gonna be always walking the long way home. So it was like it was a great esteem builder for me to be able to just start saying like, hey, I'm gonna have to just figure this out. And sometimes, and my father used to always say, sometimes you only got to fight once. Like you get a good one in, and people say he's gonna fight back. There's no reason to keep picking on him. And so I think it was really one of those things where, for a good part of my youth, I kind of bought into the culture. I wanted to be cool. I wanted to be down with all of the guys. I wanted to dress a certain way, all of those things. And I think that it was like I was living in two worlds, because as soon as I got home, I was good, it was back to the leadership was strong and it was there. Like my father ran the house and my mother as well. But it's just like when you go out into the community, you don't want to be like, you don't want to stand out in a way, right? I didn't want to stand out. I wanted to blend in. Or if I was going to stand out, it was going to be because I was like popular, not because I was different. And so I think that was the big thing for me.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to you, and when I double back to you, I want you to talk to me about those differences and what standing out look like in the two worlds that the boys talk about, the duality, right?
Mm-hmm.
That Black people have to deal with, what those two worlds look like.
Right. Okay.
All right, Steve. So I am back to you. How has your culture influenced you?
Well, yeah, and again, I'm thinking about this through the lens of my father and my father's culture. My mother's side and my father's side are culturally different, although both sides are Ashkenazic white Jewish families. Sure, they come from different parts of Eastern Europe, but they're culturally different. My father's side of the family, none of them had been to, none of them were sort of like learned. None of them had been to higher education. My father's father was one of five brothers that ran a bakery. And so my great grandfather came over from Eastern Europe with a sourdough starter, landed, and they eventually made it to Atlantic City. And he had his sourdough, and that's what he was a baker. And his children took it over, and they had one lawyer and four brothers, and it was all their photos, look like posters of the mafia, you know. So you get this really working class, tough guys who ran it, like five brothers literally having each other's back. And it was in Atlantic City, and all the resorts, and then eventually the casinos came in, and they ended up working, to support each other to have the largest bakery in southern New Jersey. My dad tells me stories of delivering rolls, breakfast rolls and dinner rolls and breads hot out of the oven to those resorts and to places in Atlantic City, delivering it in the Ginsberg's bakery trucks. So I see photos of the trucks and all that. But and also my father's father and the brothers, they played football on the beach, they played basketball, their stories are like they went down to Florida and partied with their wives and were living that kind of like life. And that's not who my father was at all. He was shy, he was into books, he was kind of not a healthy kid in terms of having like asthma and things, so he never joined in any of those sports and grew up. I think he was prescribed glasses when he was like in second grade. So I would say he became more of the stereotypical person that you think a Jewish guy is, not the kind of athletic brothers and having that energy of rough and tumble that the Ginsbergs had. And so he went to St. John's College, which is called the Great Books School, and learned the great books of literature, learned how to read Latin and those things, and really brought a high intellect, which was different. And so I think he struggled with relating to his father, which again came down to me. But there's a lot of I think stereotyping within our own culture, within my own culture of studying, and Jews do study Jewish literature and study that's how we're taught about religion, is you study it with a study partner, you question, and so that's why because we're taught to question things, we're led to things like being lawyers or things like that. Like it's kind of in our blood, but in our culture. And I think my father, because he was different, always encouraged me to just grow up, to try to figure out who you are, and be who you are. So culturally, there was definitely influences, but I know predominantly, I think just growing up and being white, I feel like white presenting. I grew up in New Hampshire, which was like being Jewish was being like almost other than white, because people didn't know who or what Jews were in the towns that I grew up in New Hampshire. So that's how it was.
And I'd like to talk a little bit when I come back around about what it's like to be othered and be white in America. Okay, Tony.
So growing up in the Bronx as a second generation Puerto Rican, there was certainly a lot of forces that influenced me and my family, and so assimilation were some of those forces. My parents were 7 when they arrived in New York from Puerto Rico, and my mother's family was larger and very, very influential in my life. And as the youngest of 6 siblings, she was the first to attend high school. And my father was also the first, he was the oldest of three. And so, in that sense, the first to graduate from high school. Um, but, there was a strong, I wouldn't say, I would just say that there was a normally strong machista ethic in my family. And much of my young adult life and education, I've sought to deconstruct that and acknowledge its impact on me. Um, and I guess, as I said before, not come to terms with I'm how I'm different, or how I've chosen to reject notions of machismo and or marianismo, the idea that women are inferior to men, the idea that women's primary role is to serve men and to be family oriented, while the man's role is to be oriented to the world of work and the outside world, um, and many other double standards and so on. And in this regard, I think my parents were probably the first, certainly on my mother's side, the first, and I think the only couple to where the woman worked outside of the household for an extended period of time, right? At least from my vantage point growing up, I think that my aunts all worked at different points, but by the time I was born, I observed most of them as stay-at-home moms, um, aunts that took care of us, and at family gatherings, it was all about the food. Um, so anyway, I think that in that sense, I internalized uh, all of those messages about what it means to be a man, and but I noticed, um, not necessarily consciously, but I noticed that my parents were different, and that there were some, that my father was part of that different dynamic. And so I think that also influenced me, and I think primed me when I was exposed to feminism, and when I was exposed to being confronted on um, my own behavior, my own expectations that women um, would somehow serve me, or um, meet the expectations that I could not even articulate, because there was just a script that was there, right? When that was complicated for me, I remember early on there were times when that was very painful and confusing, but I absolutely was ready to embrace an alternative view of myself as a man, and continue to evolve in that way, continuously, always acknowledging that this default mode of male privilege of within a Puerto Rican family was always going to be a lens that I would have to struggle with.
It's, I just want to say it's interesting because I know you fairly well, and I know your family, including your father. And I will say that you're one of the few men that I see consciously make an effort to not follow the script or the default. And I often wonder, and I'm hearing a little bit more about it, but I often wonder what that's like for you, you know? Because it's so easy to go with the script or the default, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it comes back to, comment you made earlier in reference to Abdul, but the Du Bois's notion of a duality, right? It's kind of, you're living in two worlds, and you're navigating between them, and you see that one world is expecting you to behave in a particular way, and you're motivated to critique that and to seek to undo that, even as when, certainly when you're coming from the position of privilege, you always have the discretion to moderate that, or to enjoy some privileges, because sometimes it's easier to do that than to be at the Thanksgiving table and fight your aunt who doesn't want you to wash the dishes, or doesn't want you to serve, or doesn't want you to assist,
Right.
right? And so those are things that, I've confronted, but I certainly have benefited from those privileges and enjoy those privileges to this day in ways that I don't always reject.
Right.
And but it was that formation within my family, and I think the role of my parents' relationship within my broader extended family, that I would, observation, and it'll be interesting to get some of my cousins' perspectives on this, but that I think my parents, for their generation, really represented a transition to a different way of being in relationship,
Right.
and now they are among the final members of their generation, and so there have been many funerals during the pandemic and leading up to the pandemic that have caused me to reflect on those dynamics and how they have impacted me.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. So, Abdul, I wanted to come back to the duality and living in two worlds, and to also ask you, how does that get transitioned, for lack of a better word, to your own children? I'm assuming you have children.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, as we were talking, I was like just thinking of how stark the duality really was, because in my household, it was like my family only really interacted with like Muslims, like in the household, like when
Black
people,
Muslims. Was
yeah,
it
Muslims, right? Yeah, I guess mostly black people, right?
right?
But it was like I was just thinking of how okay, some of my friends are loud and obnoxious people, right? They're just by nature, that's how they are. And at my house, people came to my house with like books in their hand, and they mostly wore suits, and they were very calm, and they laughed, but it wasn't like, it was a different culture indeed. That it's funny because I was just literally thinking about it. It wasn't until, how you go to somebody else's house and you're like, what's going on over here? Like, it's totally different. Like, I didn't realize how different it was at other people's houses. And so, like, my father was like, keep in mind, he's a leader in his work. He's an imam. So, like, our assistant imam. And so the people that he's interacting with are like people that are in leadership in everything that he does. And so it was just now, but the other thing about it is, and I was sitting here thinking, he was also, we lived in New York, but he's from Mississippi. Him and my mother are from Mississippi. And so it's kind of like, like that whole thing is like, it was all playing a role. And so I think that, inside the house, and I mean, as I got older, of course, I think that it got looser and looser because the other great thing about my dad was he did allow us to become who we are. Like, you know, he didn't like pressure us or put like weight on us to be like because you know he made a choice at a later point in his life to become a Muslim. Like he wasn't born a Muslim, and so it was like I've never felt pressure uh, to be a Muslim like him. I'm a Muslim like me, right? And so, and I think that you know when you and going back to the duality, when you go out in the community, you know, like I said, I was just trying to fit in. I'm just trying to get by. I'm just trying to figure out how do I navigate the world. And I think that, and it's also like I'm like one of one. You know, in most places I go, it wasn't like no other Muslims around. It was just me, and me and my siblings. You know, and so it's kind of like you know, being the other, right? Like I'm the other, I'm black, but I'm the guy that doesn't celebrate Christmas, doesn't celebrate Easter. You know, I'm getting no gifts and all of that kind of stuff. And we do the Eid and all that, but nobody knows what that is. And so it's like, I don't eat pork, you know, like it's like all these, I'm reading packages. Like they're like, why are you reading the package? Like, you know, it's just all these little things. And at the end of the day, I just wanted to be cool and just wanted to be down and not have to like, you know, like I said, if I was gonna be popular, great. But I don't want to be different. I didn't want to be different. I didn't want to be the guy where it's like, look at Abdul over there with his kufi on or something like, you know, like it's just I wasn't that brave and that bold. Like I mean, I was just trying to get by, and I think that at this point, it's funny. Like I always tell people, like I feel like I lived multiple lives because it was like I was living my life, and then you know when I got kidney failure in my mid-20s, and it was almost like going back to being like the kid that could get picked on because I you know I lose a lot of weight, and now you're scared again. It's like people are gonna beat me up again, and I can't turn off the mouth anymore. Like the mouth got us talk, and so it's just so many things. But it made me look at the world differently, right? I wanted to be, it made me actually try to be like my dad more towards after I got my kidney and stuff because it was like, I want to be a leader. I want to be like, leaders don't have to fight. Like not in my world, not in social work world. I don't want to lead the world, right? I just want to lead the social work world. And we don't fight. We just use our brains. We talk. We encourage. We inspire. We help. And I feel like that is like that's the role that fits the most. And then my faith is a whole nother piece. Like that's something like, you know, like you asked about my kids. I'm trying to pass down to my kids the best I can, what I know. And I you know, I hope that they're able to take the religion and use it to the best of their benefit, right? Because that's what religion is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a guide for you in your life, a way of living. And I want them to be able to have a good way of living. And so hopefully they choose right.
Well, thanks for that, because you really talked about the intersectionality of identities, right? And you had that religious identity, you had, you know, what it was like living in your household with your father, who was the leader of the household, and then also life for you outside of the household and navigating all those different identities. It seems like you've triumphed, but it certainly was a challenge when it was happening, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, Steve, I'm going to come back to you because we're going to talk about, you know, when the world sees you, particularly the non-white world, they see a white man, and not necessarily a Jewish man, and what it means to be Jewish in an Anglo community, for instance, as you mentioned earlier, um, and the othering. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how it manifested itself as you were growing up in New Hampshire?
Yeah, those are, you know, it's such a different question between how my relationship with it now and how it was when I was growing up. So let's stick to how it was when I was growing up. And it was a very small group of people. I had in New Hampshire, it's rural. So in my county, there were two high schools. So we had a large county, two high schools, and the high school was it was a quarter-mile long hallway, and on one side of the hallway was the Votech school, and on the other side was the college prep school. So right then and there, you had a bifurcation of two classifications of people. Most of the people who were in the Votech school were son of children of farmers. We, you know, some of them got pregnant, had kids. There was a little nursery in the school, and it was all the people on the Votech because they were they were fixing cars, they were building houses, and they were looking at kids, and they were doing some agriculture stuff. Nobody on the college prep side, we were in math 101, geometry and English 101, 102, 103, just going through and doing the regular college bound stuff. In that school of 1,500 people, we were divided into kind of two schools in one. Within 1,500 people, there were no more than 3 Jewish kids in that entire school. So there was no vocalization in terms of pedagogy that taught about, this is in the mid 80s, right? So it's like they were not teaching about what Jewish culture was. There was no Rosh Hashanah day off. So I would take my Rosh Hashanah and my Yom Kippur, and I would take those days off of school. And literally, my parents were running a small store, so they went to work. And I was like on my little BMX bike riding around the neighborhood. Sometimes I would ride out to synagogue, and there was, the 30 people who were there, and that was the other half of the state of New Hampshire, were those 30. But I'll tell you, it was very confusing for me to try to relate to what other people were experiencing, because my parents asked me to be home for the lighting of the Shabbos candles on Friday. There was no concept, there was no curiosity, there was no knowledge about that from anybody. Judaism wasn't in any popular culture. You didn't see it on TV, anything like that. I found myself kind of relegated to a certain space in school, social space, in terms of the cliques, where I was never let in fully or trusted fully, because I didn't go to any of their churches. I didn't know any of the things. I mean, my parents were very much, they grew up in vibrant Jewish communities. So they had no problem to just hold me back into this insular household that we had. So I had things happen, I definitely had kids throw pennies on the ground and look at me and saying, "Why aren't you picking it up? Isn't that what Jews do? Picking up pennies?" Or saying things like, "What is this? What is the deal with horns? Like, did you actually have them?" People asking these questions out loud to my face, which was just like, I didn't know that those were even rumors. Those were even prejudices. They were getting it from outside of the Jewish culture. They were getting it from their cultures coming to me. But now that I look back at it, I was in the clique, the social clique of the kid who was half Korean, the kid who was half black, the kid, and we're in New Hampshire, so it's like that we didn't even have a fully black family in the 1,500 people at my school. But I'm looking around, and it's like, if somebody looked different, had a little darker skin, wasn't quite right or fit in the norm of I say New Hampshire's the White Mountain State, not just because of the mountains. And so it was confusing, because there was, I wouldn't say glass ceilings, but there were like glass walls that I couldn't pass through because I wasn't sharing those other experiences. And they were my friends, and I didn't realize until a few years later, where I looked back and saw pictures of myself and my friends, being like, oh, I was like, we were all the outcasts, and we found each other, but it was because of this social pushing and walls being put up. and I just didn't know it, at the time. I will say that this odd thing in popular culture, which is the Wonder Years, that show, The Wonder Years, came out, and it was about a month before my bar mitzvah that the kid, I think I didn't have TV, so I didn't even watch the show, but I think his name was Fred or something like that. He had a bar mitzvah, and everyone loved the Wonder Years. So people came and they were like, "You're Jewish, right? Are you having a bar mitzvah? Can I come?" And people like asked to come because they saw some sort of party that my family didn't deliver on their expectation. We had a service. I read from the Torah, and then we had a pizza party, and people went home. And I think the kids who were there were like, "What did I just sit through? That was a lot of weird Hebrew and other things going on." And so they never came back around. They weren't like, that was cool. It was like all the cool kids asked to come. I let some of them come. And I felt like that was strange because all of a sudden they wanted something that they had been making fun of for most of my life. But my parents had the foresight to get me involved in a national youth group. So there were regionals. I was involved in the New England region and then summer camps. And so when I hit high school, they thought, you know what? Maybe they were worried about me getting a non-Jewish girlfriend. I have no idea why, but they were like, let's let him connect with some of his culture and some of his peers. Right. And I started going to some Jewish youth groups, and I actually felt there was some kinship, there was some common knowledge, and I had never really spent time with kids who grew up like I did, who knew about, Shabbat and the high holy days and what sort of the framework of morality that is Judaism. I found that outside of my state and outside of my town. And when I came back and I told people about it, they, it just sounded like, well, that's weird. Like, you're part of some religious youth group. Are you like fanatic or something? And it's, not at all. It was like a social group. But that was, yeah. It was the othering and knowing that I couldn't fully get the trust or the relationship, that depth of relationship in this large school that had all these divisions.
Yeah. Tony, it seemed like you wanted to say something. Were you?
Yes. I think that there are some interesting parallels that emerge for me in Steve's experience and Abdul's experience. Because I have my own conflict with this identity at this point in for a good part of my adult life with my Catholic identity. I feel it's important to acknowledge that was certainly, I think, a big part of my father's identity and my parents and of my formation in Catholic schools and in a very diverse parish in the Bronx that was a place that, like Abdul, where my father was very active. He wasn't, you can't be married and be a priest in the Catholic Church, but I think that my father was as active as any parishioner could be, and had great status as a result in the parish, and I think I remember once that my father was approached to be a deacon, a lay deacon, and he really didn't feel that he had the ability to pursue the study that would be involved in that role, which I think I think about that as imposter syndrome a bit, but with his humility and his relationship skills, he was beloved, and there were many other people that had similar roles that were good friends of his and the family, and some of them were also um, departed from some of those traditional masculine stereotypes. Um, but certainly within the Catholic Church, many of those stereotypes were reinforced in terms of male dominance and certainly the role of the church. But to connect to Steve's experience, it was also within that experience, which I rejected for a while and later embraced and became very active in youth groups. And those the youth group in my parish in particular was really a place that I also began to develop leadership skills, and that definitely got me on my journey, and many others in the journey to social work and education and service and so on. Um, and I think that so I identify with some of those experiences on Steve's side as well. Um, and one important experience outside of my parish in the Bronx was being involved in a youth center in Manhattan on a retreat that was a Catholic retreat, but it was really focused um, on Puerto Rican and Latino culture and the Catholic experience, and a strong emphasis on identity and exposure and recovery of identity for those of us who were born and raised in New York, and that was another very powerful part of my journey, of my cultural awakenings and passion for understanding um, the Puerto Rican experience and the challenges that Puerto Ricans and other Latinos and other people of color were confronting, and led to my was a direct relationship to my pursuit of Puerto Rican studies courses and so on. So those I certainly credit my father for um, being in those places and certainly having access to those opportunities. I think I certainly chose that route, and my parents reinforced that in ways that were the best that they could, and I think they were really meaningful. So I just wanted, those were important connections to both Steve and Abdul. And I think that those experiences also suggest to me, and this was some coming out of my dissertation a little bit, but that in those spaces there's great social capital. They're protective spaces for young people who are trying to navigate and figure out um, where do I belong, and how do I navigate the sense of rejection of being an outsider, and also exposure to certainly um, in the Bronx there was certainly other alternatives in terms of the way that I could have dealt with um, my adolescent developmental tasks and substances and violence and so on were not too far away. But there were many protective factors in my community that were certainly, I'd say, first and foremost, were my parents.
Right. Yeah. You know, Abdul, I was thinking of you as well, and I was thinking, you said you lived in the suburbs, which for back then in New York City, White Plains, I think it was primarily white in the suburbs, right? With the exception of maybe a few families. Well, I don't know the numbers, but certainly, um, uh, you know, what was it like for you, not only being Black, growing up in the suburbs, in a white suburb, but also being Muslim, growing up in a white suburb?
Yeah, I think that it's funny, like, White Plains, you could be 1 block away, that's the suburbs, and then you go 2 blocks down and you're back in the hood. So it's not like it was like, that far away from everything. It was just
So was it White Plains Road or White Plains, New York?
White Plains, New York.
Oh,
It's
okay.
like basically if you lived on Mamaroneck Avenue, where I live, if you walk down Mamaroneck Avenue, you're gonna still hit the people that lived in apartment buildings,
Right.
and you're gonna hit the projects. The more you walk, you're gonna get to places, right? And so I think that most of my friends lived in an apartment. I lived in a house, and I think that that's and it was the suburban area because there were all houses in my area, and so I think that um, it's funny because I grew up in the 70s, a lot of people have like Muslim names, right? So Hakeem and Jabbar and different names that are like similar. They may not be Muslims. And so I don't think like out in the community, people took that into account. Like I don't know if they knew so much that Abdul, like, unless you knew me, right? It might have mattered. The people that were in my neighborhood, though, white people, mostly white people, were some of the nicest white people I ever met. Like, I mean, I always remember like there was this lady on my first day of like my parents let me walk to school by myself, like when I was in second grade. And on the way back home, I got lost. It wasn't really lost. My house was right down the street, but you know how when you're a kid and everything seems like out of place. And so I just sat down and just was crying. I just said, I'm just gonna give up and just live right here on this corner. And a lady came out and she asked me what, this is when kids, like, it was important to know your address. And she was like, you know what? I'll take you home. So she walked me home. And then every day for the rest of my like elementary school years and all of my siblings after that, we would go to her house every day after school and she would make us cookies. And so this was like one of my neighbors. She lived right around the corner. And so every day we would go get peanut butter cookies after school. And then like my next door neighbor, we'd go over there and we would like break his leaves. And they would make us like, during Christmas, they would make us a Christmas house, like one of those houses full with candy and stuff. And so that was Mr. and Mrs. Sal, and they were Italian. And so it was like kind of cool in a way, like it was a good community, like once you could get like it was, I don't ever remember like feeling like I knew I was Muslim and I knew I wasn't like experiencing what everybody else was experiencing. But I think that in some ways, like I was just thinking like, every Sunday, most kids that live in White Plains, they're in White Plains. They don't go to the city. But every Sunday I went to Harlem to go to the masjid. And so like, it was like, like I was like in the real New York City. White Plains is kind of like, not the real, it's New York, but it's not the same as going to Harlem. And I mean, so it's like, we're on 116th Street in Harlem and walking around and so feeling comfortable because we go every week. And so the things that you see are very different. It's a different experience than when you are in White Plains. I saw Muhammad Ali at, you go to the masjid and Muhammad Ali's in there. And you go to the masjid and, Imam Wardi Muhammad comes to this place. And he's at the time, like, it's a big deal. Like, you recognize like, oh, wow, like, okay. And you're sitting in the masjid with 1,000 people, on any given Sunday. And so I think it was a different experience because, a lot of my friends, like I said, they were in White Plains. The farthest they might go is Yonkers or something like that. They wouldn't even get to the Bronx, And so it was like they never even knew until they got a little bit older when they might go into the city. But from the time I was a little kid, we always went to New York City. And it was like I think it was a cool experience because as I got older, like it could be culture shock in some ways if you've never been to, because how things are, how things move a little bit faster. But when I was out there, it was like, oh, we already been to the flea market. We already did the different things. And so it made you feel comfortable. I always felt like, even when we moved to Connecticut, I felt like when I moved to Connecticut, I felt like I had to slow down a beat, right? Like to kind of fit in here. But it was like, I always felt like it was special being from New York, like, and knowing New York, like being able to say, yo, let's go down to the city, take some kids from Connecticut up there. And they're like, oh man, you know, and not taking them to like Times Square, like taking them to like, yo, we're gonna go to Harlem and go, you know, see some real things. And then it's like, even when I went to Mississippi, you know, for college, I had to slow down 5 beats, you know, like, because you had to pick up the way that people do things. Like, I think that was also another skill that I developed over my life, is being able to like assimilate to the community, right? So like, if you go to Mississippi, just walking, right? In New York, if you're from New York, you walk fast, you just be moving. Do that in Mississippi, you be sweat out every day. Like I was in college, sweated out, walking from one building to the next building. And then I just started paying attention to the people from Mississippi, moving slow, taking their time, talking to people. And so it just became one of those things where I was like, oh, let me put on another t-shirt and walk slow and take my time. So I think, you know, I've learned how to fit in. And I think that that's like you know, so Steve was saying like how to be the other. What I learned is like, yo, let me teach. I learned the skill of tell a good joke, you know, like how to just be one of the guys and just be there. And so,
yeah.
But the thing that's interesting, and you know, we moved, and so when you move, I don't want a lot in a way, you don't fully get in, and so it's like, because there's kids that they've been friends since kindergarten, you know, like whatever, and so like here I come when I moved to White Plains, I came in 2nd grade, and then by the time I was in 10th grade, I moved to Connecticut, and I come to Connecticut, and so you always have to kind of put on your little, you know, you got to figure it out. Your assimilation is going to work for that group of people. So
Yeah, I understand assimilation as an immigrant. Yeah, but I wanted to go back to your relationships with your father and ask you, as a child, how did your father express love, and how does that, and what does it look like for you in terms of how you express love to your children?
one of the things that I learned, like, so my father, the first time I could remember my father like giving me a hug and telling me he loved me, I was going to college. Like he was literally dropping me off at the School of Visual Arts in New York. I was gonna go to film school, and he gave me a hug, and then he was like, "I love you." And I was kind of like, when I walked away, I was kind of like, "What just happened?" Like I was stressed out, like what's going on? You know, I was bugging out. And so, but my father was like, when I look back, like even like this weekend or this whole football season, I did this thing with my son where like, instead of being like the year before, every game I was like on the sideline. And then after the game, I would give him like the critique of the game. I'm like, yo, you need to do this, you need to do that. And so that doesn't work. That didn't work for my son. It was not good for him. So this season, what I did was I sat in the stands. And then after the game, I would leave. And then when he got home, I would wait for him to come to me to talk about the game. And I didn't really talk about the game. I just told him, good game. It's great game. Oh man, you had a good sack. You had whatever. And so one of the things that, you know, because we do all this stuff with fatherhood, it's funny because like I've been doing fatherhood work for 15 years. And most of my work has always been like to help somebody else with fatherhood. Like, yo, I'm gonna teach you how to be a father. But since we do the manhood tree stuff, you know, some of the groups, it makes you really like analyze your fatherhood. And so what I do, my son is a hugger. My son likes to hug. Like he wants to hug. Yes, last night he forced me and my wife to give him a hug, like a group hug, you know? And so it's like really one of those things of accepting, like, you know, as a father, what I really want to do is I don't want to be remembered or known as a father that just was a provider, or a father that just was that was just there. Like I want them to be able to say that my father told me that he loved me. My father changed for the better. Like he tried to become a better father. Like he was always working on something, and you could see my efforts in the things that I do. And so I just think that, and I like I said, I love my dad. I think he was a great father, but he wasn't necessarily verbal with it. But there was a lot of things that he would do. Like even like when I used to play sports, he never like gave me a critique after the game. he would just videotape the game, and he just loved to be there. Like, he just loved the idea of being around it. And so I just took a play out of his book and was just like, enjoy it, because my son, more than likely, he's not going to the league, right? It's not like I'm watching a kid that's about to get to the NFL. So like, why am I stressing him out? And so just, you know, enjoy the moment of him being a kid. Because, and one of the things I think a lot about is like how fast the time goes. Like, you know, he was a little kid. Now he's like taller. He's almost taller than me. And it's like, and my daughters, my little daughter, I say little daughter, but because she's younger, but my little daughter, you know, trying to be able to be the father she needs, because it's different than my son. She's not a hugger. I told her today, I told her I love her, and she gave me the peace sign. Like, it was the weirdest thing. I was like, I love you. She was like, okay. And I just like, I didn't know what to do. And so, and then my oldest daughter, it's the same thing. Like, I just did one of my new fatherhood monologues, and I talked about how, you know, like when she used to live with me, and then she like left. She went back to live with her mom. And I realized, like, I was writing the monologue, I realized that, you know, like, we assume that we know how to be fathers. And what I was thinking about is, like, she was like just coming to live with me, and she was a teenager, right? My daughter that lived with me every day was like 3. And so I knew how to be a father to a 3-year-old. For her, it was like mostly gifts, and, you know, whenever I would see it would be like a holiday, it would be something fun. And when you parent a teenager every day, it's not the same as a parenting a 3-year-old. And so being able to like recognize and even say out loud that I didn't know how to be the father you needed at that time. And now I'm trying, like, so now she's 26 and I'm a grandfather, I got my grandson. I'm trying to be the father. Like, so each one of my kids need a different father. They need a different me. And so like, I'm trying to be that. And I think that my siblings would say the same about my dad. I'm sure they, you know, of course my dad loved me the most, but the other kids, you know, they had something with them. There was something going on, like they were around. So.
Thank you for sharing that. That's a good one. All right, Steve, I'm going to come to you. So in terms of how did your father express love to you, and how does that get translated to your, your love or your demonstration of love to your children?
The only way I can think of my father expressing love, it's difficult to really, really know. He was quiet. He was a quiet man. He felt more comfortable, I think, in quiet spaces. And we had 4 kids, 3 boys and a girl. So the kids were loud. And I think his self-protection just was like isolation. So it was like he left us alone. Only a couple times did he say, "Let's go for a walk." You know, let's connect. But he kept a keen eye out for things that he was looking to be proud of. You know, he wanted to see me succeed. And so I think his love for me was hoping that he could support me and lay me with the foundation to succeed. But he's also not a guy who talks about his emotions, not a guy who's transparent. I remember, you know, some of the happiest moments I connected to him was when I graduated college, and then I graduated graduate school, and he cried. You know, it was one of the few times he was crying in the car when he dropped me off after my grad school graduation. We had our dinner, and he dropped me off, and he just said, with tears coming down his face, "I really am proud of you." And because I didn't have any "I love yous," "I hug you," "I want to be with you," "let's go do something together," you know, the kind of dad I wanted and the kind of dad I wanted to be a dad when I was 25 years old. Because like I said, I always felt like he was so old. I wanted a 25-year-old to be a 25-year-old dad, where I was taking my kid to the baseball games and had boundless energy to like throw a frisbee around, tackle, do gymnastics or whatever, because that really is the opposite of my dad, who was like, I'm quiet, I'm not physical, and 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 I got the son now. My son is like, he likes to just climb me like a jungle gym. I walk in the door and he climbs all the way up me to my shoulders, and then he's grabbing my head. So it's kind of like every time that hurts my back or makes me feel old, I try to remind myself, like I wanted to be that 25-year-old dad. I wasn't a dad until I was 38, so it didn't work out exactly the way I was thinking. But because of some of the things I wished I had gotten, is some of the things I'm developing with my child.
Good. Thank you. So Tony.
Well, it's I could relate to Steve having his son climb on him all the time. My daughter is going to be 5, and she likes to climb on me too, and I'm no spring chicken. But I have done better physically than I expected. But at my mature age, but I think that one of the ways that my father showed affection was physically. I mean, he would hug me and kiss me. Not, I wouldn't say overly so, but I think that I think about discipline, and there's certainly there was physical discipline in his upbringing and in my extended family, and the belt was part of that. And I remember my father struggling with that, and and I think that was one of the ways that he conveyed affection and love and an alternative to, I think, a performance of masculinity that wouldn't struggle with that, right? That and I won't say that was all the time, but I guess I'm remembering the times when he struggled with that. Perhaps because it's so long ago. And I remember one time when I was probably, maybe 14 and was just really being a real pain in the ass. And it was the only time that, he got so frustrated that he cursed. And I remember how bad he felt that he got to that place. And certainly when my daughter became a toddler and, would just kind of be increasingly aggressive, or even today when she, shows her love by punching me in the stomach, thinking about my responses to that, or my responses when physically she might push my limits. And so I guess some of those things were modeled for me back then in ways that may be part of my emotional muscle memory that are playing themselves out now, perhaps with the privilege of a lot more education and an opportunity to think about what's going on developmentally for my daughter and for me, and how can I respond. But in the passion of any given moment, I'm not thinking about those things. I'm just reacting, or I'm trying to protect her or protect myself. And I think some of this also for me you know, I do probably play a little, you know, I kind of engage her aggression and I don't seek to I don't seek to diminish it. I think my wife sometimes seeks to diminish her aggression more, and uh, perhaps that's because I want her to feel like she can be aggressive and she can be powerful. She could use her body in ways that are natural for her, or she's still trying to figure that out without certainly without hurting anyone or herself. That's always the limit. But I'm a lot more tolerant or forgiving in this regard. And so I don't know. I don't know how, you know, there are some connections there, but I need to think more about it. Um, and I think I seek to model being an engaged father. And, you know, my father worked a lot. And there were times when he, you know, he had part-time jobs and would come home late. But, you know, I remember most vividly the times when he got he got tickets to the ball game from his job, and we would go, and those were really important times. So spending time and the investment in time and just building relationship or being with each other is something that I value and seek to you know is part of my own parenting.
Right. Thank you. So, gentlemen, I'm going to be wrapping up this session, but I have a last question, and it has two focus. The first one is, um, what is your relationship like as an adult with your father? Um, Even if it's past, you can talk about what it was like. And if you had some last words to say to your father, or if you wanted to send him a message, what would that be? Who would like to go first?
Well, I'll go so I can get it over with. This is a tough question for me. Um, well, before my father got sick, my relationship with my father was great. I was just telling someone yesterday that, you know, every Sunday, my whole family would go to his house, right? We would go to my parents' house. We would play cards, we would play dominoes, we would joke around, we would eat dinner together. My father worked every day at my people. He'd come to my people. Maybe he would come up with an idea for a program. Maybe, you know, he was running the fatherhood program. He would drop some knowledge on us. So, you know, he would, whatever, he would, you know, so it was like I used to see my father almost like 6 days out of the week, you know, as an adult. And even there were times, you know, where, you know, because I started my people is my agency, but it's like I always tell people like I used his name to get to where I am in a way. So you have to give reverence. And it was like, you know, but there's also it was kind of cool for me to get to the point where I felt confident in my own name, my own self, even with him around, to be able to lead and do things the way that I see fit, as opposed to the way I think he might see fit or for the way he sees fit. And so I thought that our relationship, it got to the point of like, I don't think it was necessarily like, I would say it was something like a friendship, right? Because I always felt like he was still like my father. It was different than anything I have with my friends, and it was special. And if I was gonna say anything to my dad right now, I'll just tell him I miss him so much, and I wish that he was here. And of course, right, I would love to. You know, what I always try to tell people is about like time and you know, as I've gotten older, I recognize the how precious time is. It's like the most precious thing. You know, like when kids are, you like, you guys got little kids. When they're little, you want them to get big, right? And then when they get big, you wish they were little again. You wish they were like I wish my kids still jumped on my neck, right? But if my kids jumped on my neck, I'd be in trouble because they big. And so, right? And so what I always what I'm interested in and what I would love to tell people is that you got to cherish your time because it goes by so quick, and you still have to live after it. So it's either you have all the memories, you could pile in so many memories and experiences and love, love, all that love, you could put it in there. And then I also say that, I wish I had gotten bold enough as a young man to be able to, or as a man to be able to say how, like, to tell my dad and tell my family I love them more, because it wasn't our culture in our family, right? It's not like we're just walking around telling you I love you and stuff. But I think that I wish that would have been something that I would have said, I would have learned sooner, and I would have taken advantage of the time when I had it.
Thank you. Thank you. Steve?
Tell me the two-part question again.
Yes. What was your relationship like with your father as an adult? You being an adult with your father, because we talked previously about your relationship with him as a child, and also if you had some last words or you want to send a message to him, what would you say to him?
Yeah. So I'll say, as an adult, my father he's had a stroke, and he still functions pretty well, but he's old. He is older, in his probably last year of he still drives. He's very, very slowing down on things. So in terms of my relationship with him now, I try to support him I try to be with him in his interests. So I go to him rather than him coming to me and asking me what have you read. So I ask him, what have you been up to, and all that. He's never been much of a talker on the phone. Even in person, the limits of hanging out is maybe 15, 20 minutes, and then he wants to disappear for a bit. And so his interests are different than mine. So I hang in there as much as I can. I wouldn't say it's a strain or a struggle. It's just like, hey, you're my dad. You got some differences than me. I'm your son. I got some differences than you. Like, let's hang in and support each other's interests as much as we can when we're together. And what I would tell him in terms of, something to tell my dad is, it's never, ever a disruption to get a call from you. I want you to check in. If your limit is 5 minutes, call me every other day, 5 minutes. Reach out. Like, I think feels like he's respectful. He's like, I'm giving you space to be you. And it's like, yeah, but we have a relationship. You call me as much as you want. You reach out. I'm your son. I'm here for you.
Great. Thank you. Tony?
Well, I think one of the things that I have come to value at this point in my life, and certainly among others, Brene Brown has helped me really understand the notion of vulnerability. And I think that kind of courage, or vulnerability is a function of courage and of strength. And I think that I saw that in my father growing up. And I think that one of the things that I probably have been a bit frustrated with in the last several years is a sense of stubbornness that I experienced in my father, and I saw that connected to machismo and in terms of being willing to support my mother in some of her goals, which were to move back up north. And I think that my father was really resistant to that idea for a long time. And I was very frustrated with him about it. And I think that as you know, Steve mentioned about his father, I think my father is really his health is slowing down, and he's no longer stubborn around that and some other things. And so I kind of see it as an opportunity to strengthen my relationship with him. And that will probably, hopefully, as the pandemic ends, bring him closer to where I live. And I know that my hope about it is that as a grandfather spending time with his grandmother and his son will strengthen all of our relationships and connections. That's my hope. And so I look forward to that possibility, and I appreciate the opportunity to share with my friends today.
Yeah, and if you had a message for your father, what would you say?
I just want to thank him for supporting me to be the man that I am today, and that I love him.
Thank you. Gentlemen, you have shown strength through your stories, and I'm sure that the audience would appreciate it. Three men, professional men, very different backgrounds, parents in a, taking a lot of strength and courage and understanding from your fathers, taking what you felt is the best of what you got and adding your own part of it to the mix in order to be parents and be fathers. So thank you very much for the time and telling your stories and being the men that you are. And I hope we could continue this conversation at another time. Thank you.
Thank you.
You.
Peace, guys.